What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. Once again on this series where we take a look at the development cycle of champions, we're going to be looking at a champion that is really old, Orianna. Now Orianna is a champion that had a fairly unique development cycle because she went through what is called a bottom-up design, which is a design where the Riot champion designer who's working on the champion starts with the mechanics, starts with the gameplay features, develops the whole gameplay kit, and then after that figures out how to theme it. Now this is a design style that is something that the Riot developers have done a lot in the past, but it's not actually very common at all. The Riot champion designers for the past couple of years have very systematically stuck to what is called a top-down design, where they start with the theme, they start with the character, the gameplay sort of niche, and then build the gameplay features afterwards. Either way though, join us today in taking a look back at Orianna's development cycle to find out what Orianna could have been. Now we usually start these out by starting with the characterization, with the concepts, the concept art and stuff, but that's not really true to Orianna's development timeline in this case. So we're going to go bottom up too and start with the different versions of her gameplay that didn't end up making it into her finalized kit. Now Riot Zephyrus, who was Orianna's designer, commented that her entire gameplay kit had been designed and finalized before any theme conceptualization had actually started. So to create Orianna's base kit, Riot Zephyrus took a relatively simple approach. He started with an ability, Sivir's Boomerang Q actually, and then he broke that ability into 3 separate parts. So this gave him the core of Orianna's gameplay. She'd have a controllable weapon that she could send out or return back to her. Essentially, in this version of the kit, using QWE in a rotation with the theoretical Orianna gameplay will act very similar to throwing out a single Sivir Q, although of course with some more punch and overall power tied in and some extra benefits. So the Q is going to throw the orb out, dealing damage to the enemy it passes through, W is going to emit an AoE slow and damage enemies around the orb, and the E is going to bring it back and then give you a little shield and some resistances for a little bonus effect. And in those 3 simple abilities, Zephyrus had found a way to create a completely unique approach to traditional mage gameplay based on the inspiration from Sivir. Rather than slinging spells, she controls an orb that stays on the battlefield, and this has allowed Orianna players to leave their orb wherever they choose, as long as they stay close enough to it, giving way to a zone control playstyle that allows you to force enemy players away from specific locations on the map. Now the real difficult part with the development of Orianna was finding an ultimate that fit in well with the rest of her gameplay. Now Riot Zephyrus tried a ton of different things in a bid to create the perfect synergistic ultimate. One of the early versions acted quite similarly to Orianna's current E now, but instead of targeting an ally, you could attach the orb to an enemy, in a way similar to Lulu's Help Picks ability. In fact, we're guessing that Zephyrus liked the idea of this ability, but didn't really think it was contributing to Orianna's gameplay enough as an ultimate. Overall, probably wasn't actually that powerful, so he did save it later for a champion as a basic ability to use on Lulu later on. He also tried one version of the ability where Orianna's orb would become like this mini shock aura, although he didn't specify whether it was an instant effect like Blitzcrank ultimate or a damage over time thing kind of similar to Victor's ultimate. Although it matches better with Orianna's kit than attaching your ball onto an enemy, it's still not necessarily impactful enough to do her solid on her gameplay and make her a decent champion. With those 2 ultimates, if Orianna had either of those, she would have just been an incredibly weak champion. And overall, Orianna still lacked enough crowd control to be a true zone control character. Another attempted solution was actually quite crazy. Pressing her ultimate would simply give you an additional ball to control, so you would have 2 balls on the map. Now that is a pretty powerful effect, making it a strong candidate for ultimate since it would allow you to essentially completely double your damage output, your crowd control effects, and your shielding capabilities, giving you just an insane steroid for the duration. Unfortunately, it was actually an absolute mess to control, and just program had tons of bugs. We have to remember this was way back, I believe season 1, maybe even early betas when they started development on her, and it likely would have given Orianna a skill floor so high that only the very best players would ever bother to even use her. So the ideal solution to Orianna's ultimate ended up being a lot more simple in its design. Like her W, it's an AoE effect that occurs around the ball, rather than Orianna, unless of course she chooses to attach the ball to herself. Unlike her W, however, it gives a badass black hole-like crowd control effect that sucks all enemies into the center in this massive shockwave. So Command Shockwave achieved a few key things for Orianna. It really synergized incredibly well with the rest of her kit. It also gave Orianna some incredibly needed hard crowd control effects, and it turned her into a massive threat that caused enemy players to be extremely careful when it came to playing around her ball. It made her ball really threatening. So with the design of Command Shockwave, Orianna's gameplay was complete and just perfect, and it was equally satisfying to play as it was to play against, making her one of, honestly, in my opinion, probably one of the most well-designed champions ever in League of Legends, from a gameplay perspective at least. Now with Orianna's gameplay complete, it was time to actually create a character that matched up with the abilities. The working concept up to this point that they had been playtesting with was simply a character known as Ball Girl, which goes to show how little focus they had put on characterization thus far.
Zephyrus made Orianna, and Orianna started out as a prototype. It was just something we called Ball Girl internally coming, because literally he had like a ball and just dispersed and did stuff. And we're like, this is so cool. We did play tests with it with like temporary art, and we're like, wow, how can we turn this into a character?
Riot knew that they did want the concept to be a girl, and they knew that she'd be controlling a ball, so Riot Zephyrus made his own attempt at defining the Ball Girl as a fully fleshed out character, having been inspired by Toho's Project Hong Mei-ling. Hong Mei-ling is a martial arts specialist, typically wearing a dragon martial arts robe, so Riot Zephyrus used this design as a base, and then they added in a Chinese dragon orb as justification for her ball controlling prowess. The theme was pretty simple, although hugely different from the Orianna we know today. As a character, she'd essentially be a dragon reincarnated in human form, but she'd still be the one in possession of her dragon orb. Now as a character concept, that's pretty cool, but for unknown reasons, the rest of the team decided to move in a different direction, possibly because Riot had other ideas for dragon champions at the time, or because they wanted to cover new ground rather than defaulting to Eastern design influences. The creative team and the art team got together and they came up with a new concept, one that would eventually become Orianna. The early concept art shows it pretty clearly. The new direction was this clockwork character, with Orianna being a clockwork girl controlling her clockwork ball. In terms of bottom-up design, this provided Riot with the context for their new champion. All that was left to do was refine her visual design, give her a name, and build out her character to create a backstory that would give the players something to resonate with. And with that said, the Lady of Clockwork was finally complete, and she went on to become one of the most successful champions in the history of League of Legends. You know, I gotta say, Orianna is definitely a masterpiece of design when it comes to the gameplay. In terms of the visuals and the thematics, it's maybe a little bit lacking, but that's kind of what happens when you go with this bottom-up design style. You end up with an incredible gameplay kit, but a kind of lackluster theme. Overall though, Orianna is an awesome champion, and it's really cool to see what she could have been. So I hope you guys enjoyed this look into the development of Orianna. If you did, hit that like button. If you didn't enjoy the video, feel free to hit that dislike button too. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.